Hello again, part 3 of the reproductive system. We've hit male reproductive system, parts of the female, and now we're going to go through the cycles that are occurring. So the ovarian cycle occurs in what organ? The ovaries, right? So about 28 days, and you're going to have these different things happen in the ovary. And the picture shows it going around the ovary. It's not going around the ovary, it's just so it can show all the stages at once, right? You only see one of these at one time. So what happens at the beginning of the monthly cycle is that you start with those eggs and they start developing. They're growing. Follicles are places of growth, so these are follicles, right? And so eventually you get one that's farther along than the others, and it becomes what's called the Graafian follicle. It's going to be the one that's ovulated, and it inhibits the others, and it keeps growing, and then you'll see this differentiation of cells. You'll see cells right around that egg, and then you'll see this fluid-filled space called the antrum, and you'll see cells on the outside. You'll see cells on the outside. Okay, and so what happens then is that fluid-filled space gets bigger and bigger until ovulation, where the egg bursts out. So the egg and the cells around it burst out. Those cells around it are going to become that like protective layer that sperm have to get through. And so the cells lining that are left over is going to become what's called the corpus luteum. And then that's going to be active unless fertilization doesn't occur. So if fertilization occurs, human chorionic gonadotrophin will be released. That's what they test for in pregnancy tests, and that'll keep the corpus luteum active. It'll keep your hormone levels higher. If not, it'll break down into what's called the corpus albicans and degenerate, and then the cycle will start all over. So here you can see the fluid-filled space, the egg, and there you can see ovulation. We've got a nice picture. We're going to go through everything together. I'm going to write out the steps on a future slide. So this is just kind of big picture story what's happening. Okay. So there's ovulation. Oh, you can't quite see it. Hold on. Okay, now you can see it. I realize that if I move where I am, it just is there for the whole thing then. So wherever I put my picture last is where the whole, it's not a big deal. It's fine. Okay, so here is an actual, the ovary is the white stuff, and then that's the follicle. It's real red and inflamed, and then there's the egg with the cells around it ovulating out. And then that's going to go into the oviducts, the uterine tubes, where it could get fertilized. And here's what's going on at each stage. We're going to add that in a little bit. So ovarian cycle, at the same time there's a cycle going on in the uterus, so the uterine cycle. And it's all about that endometrium, the outer lining of the uterus. So the uterine cycle actually starts at menstruation, where the egg was unfertilized, and we shed down to our base layer. And then we start building it back up, getting these blood vessels thicker, and then waiting to see if it'll happen or not. And if unfertilization is again the case, we'll shed and do that again. So let's look at our 14, 28-day cycle. Okay. So we've got ovarian up here. And so the first 14 days of the ovarian is the follicular phase, because the follicles are developing. Okay. All right, and you can see that picture of those follicles developing. And then the second half, what's in the ovary now? Not the follicle, it's the corpus luteum. So it's the luteal phase. With the corpus luteum. Oh. Okay. So that's what happens in the ovaries for that 28-day cycle, 0 to 28. Now let's look at the uterine. So we start for the first 3 to 7, approximately 5 days. We'll just do this whole first week. Is the menstrual phase. right, where we're menstruating, shedding. And then we'll go on and we'll start building up again. So from here until ovulation is called the proliferative phase. To proliferate means to divide and grow. So proliferative phase, we're doing rapid growth of that endometrium. And then we've got the secretory phase, where we're still growing a bit, thickening those blood vessels, and waiting to see if implantation occurs or not. Ovarian cycle, uterine cycle, same 28-day cycle. Okay, so why does this happen, you might ask? Hormones. So let's go through this a little bit. I don't expect you to have all of this memorized, but I think this is a beautiful view showing what's going on. So we've got what it looks like in the ovary, what it looks like in the uterus, what we just wrote about, and then we've got two sets of hormones. We've got estrogen and progesterone. We've got FSH and LH. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. So, hey, that makes sense, right? Follicles stimulate growth. Luteinizing hormone is going to have to do with ovulation and then going into the luteal phase. So they're named for what they do in the female reproductive system. Men have them too. They help with sperm production development. But we're going to look more at them here. Okay. So you'll have this initial peak of FSH and you'll start your follicular phase. And you can see estrogen and progesterone levels. So normally estrogen and progesterone, they inhibit FSH-LH. So these are going to be lower. But you'll see once these start to peak, they actually excite FSH and LH, and that's what causes ovulation. Okay? And so now they're going to go over again, and progesterone levels are going to change if your egg is fertilized. If it's fertilized, it stays high. The corpus luteum will secrete more. If not, they drop down and you'll restart the cycle. And we'll look at what hormonal birth control does, but basically it controls these peaks to control those peaks. And so here's each of the hormones and what they do exactly and where they're made. Okay, so let's look at what happens if you have less estrogen when you go through menopause. So big things here. Less fat, wrinkles, hot flashes, it'll change the pyrogens, the hypothalamus, vaginal dryness, growth of facial hair, increased risk of heart and blood vessel diseases, and then osteoporosis. So if you remember, estrogen helps those osteoblasts build bone. So without it, the bone won't get as thick. Females will have to either take supplements or do some like weightlifting to increase their bone density. Okay. Disorders. The first disorder I have listed is polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. So this is fairly common. About 10% of women can have this. And here you can see these cysts on the ovaries. There's the uterine tube to the uterus. And so you can have cysts without having this disease, but these cysts are caused by increased androgens, so testosterone and its derivatives, and less progesterone. So that also means that they're going to have more of those like facial hair, testosterone issues, hair loss, irregular periods. And so if you don't have enough progesterone, you won't ovulate as much. You might have irregular periods because of that. And then you can have issues with fertility. Next, premenstrual syndrome, PMS. Okay. So I had to do research after reading in this book because it went contrary to what I had previously taught. So I looked up some studies. So symptoms appear 7 to 10 days before the period, possibly caused by progesterone deficiency. So I read an article that compiles the work of lots of different researchers. It's called a meta-study. And so you can kind of get a bigger overall picture of what's going on. And you can see it here. Approximately, like what I was using was this 5 to 8% of women suffer from severe premenstrual syndrome, not the 60+% that can have just the general symptoms. And there's also a more severe PMDD where, let's look at this article. Got it here. Okay. So you should check it out. I've got the link. So what I had previously found was recall bias is what I thought I heard in things where, like, if you say, hey, I'm upset, it must be because of my period, you remember it better than if you're just, I'm upset. And then let's look at the definition of PMDD. So premenstrual dysphoric disorder, it stipulates the presence of at least 5 luteal phase symptoms. So remember, the luteal phase is the second half before menstruation occurs again. So mood symptom, depressed mood, anxiety, tension, ability, persistent anger and irritability. You have to have 2 cycles of daily charting to confirm, and evidence of functional impairment. So it's really hard for women to get diagnosed with this. It also can't have anything to do with other diagnoses, otherwise they won't diagnose it, and they won't treat it. And so here you can see the factors from the charting: depressive, physical symptoms, anger, irritability, food cravings. And you can see the peak, if you read down here, the peak was -2 for some things and -1. And that just means like the day before or 2 days before menstruation. So it's really interesting. In case you didn't think that on your own, I'm going to tell you that. Okay. So next, menstrual cramps. Okay, there are a couple different types of prostaglandins, and the resource I got this from was ridiculous. It's not scientific at all, but I thought it was a pretty picture. So take it with a grain of salt or a glass of wine, if you're legal to do that. But what happens is there's prostaglandins released, and some of these are inflammatory, some are anti-inflammatory, some cause pain, and they cause the smooth muscle of the uterus to contract, and that can hurt. You're also going to have less blood flow as you spasm sometimes, so that can cause pain. Okay. And then endometriosis. So this is where you have that endometrium, the uterine lining, not lining the uterus. So here we can see outside of the uterus, we've got this tissue forming. It can be severely painful. It can also cause problems with infertility. Okay. And then last, breast cancer usually starts in those milk ducts lining. And this shows how to do a self-exam. Finding different lumps are actually very common. It's important to go have them checked out no matter what, but you should be doing monthly self-breast exams. And what they'll have to do after that, if you find one, is a monogram. Nope, they will not put your initials on it. A mammogram. So if you haven't had a mammogram, I had a lump, it's fine. They did a mammogram. They put 40 pounds of pressure, and they squish your breast in it, and it's very painful and uncomfortable. And then if they don't see the results they were looking for there, they'll take a sample of it and see what's inside there, or a sonogram to see what it is. So this is Deborah Rhodes. She does a brilliant TED Talk that I might make extra credit. I think I probably will, but if not, watch it, especially if you want to go into like radiography or something, where she does this like digital mammography where breast tissue, especially when you're younger, is very dense and it's hard to see any thing in there. You have to be a real expert and you can still miss things. Her way is much more straightforward. She doesn't make any money off of it, and it's really interesting. Okay. So risk factors, more estrogen. So all of these are things where you might have more estrogen associated with it. So here's part 3, and then we'll go on to part 4. This is going to probably be the longest chapter. It is.